The whispering walls. Lily had been driving for hours. Exhausted and desperate for rest, she saw a flickering neon sign in the distance that read, "Vacancy." She turned off the main road and pulled into the lot of the run-down Whispering Pines Motel. It was the only place for miles. The lobby smelled of mildew and old carpet. The desk clerk, an elderly man with sunken eyes and a crooked smile, handed her a key without saying a word. Room 12. She noticed his fingers were stained with something dark, but she dismissed it as ink or dirt. The room was sparse, with faded wallpaper peeling at the corners and a single dim lamp on the nightstand. She felt a chill despite the summer heat. Fatigue overpowering her unease, she collapsed onto the bed, not bothering to change out of her clothes. Sometime in the middle of the night, she was awoken by a soft whispering sound. Groggy, she turned over, thinking it was the wind, but the whispering grew louder, coming from the walls. She sat up, her heart pounding. The voices were unintelligible, a chorus of murmurs and hushed tones. She pressed her ear to the wall and froze. "We see you." She recoiled, her breath quickening. Maybe it was just the pipes or her tired mind playing tricks on her. She lay back down, pulling the thin blanket over her head, and willed herself to sleep. In the morning, she decided she couldn't stay another night. She packed her things and went to check out. The lobby was empty. The bell on the counter remained unanswered. Growing more anxious by the minute, she left the key and some cash on the desk and hurried to her car. As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The old man stood at the window, watching her with that same eerie smile. She shuddered and pressed down harder on the gas. Several miles down the road, she realized she had left her phone in the room. Reluctantly, she turned back. When she arrived, the motel looked different. The sign was gone, and the building seemed more decrepit than before. The door to room 12 was ajar. Heart pounding, she stepped inside. The room was cold, and her phone was on the bed. But something else caught her eye. The wallpaper had been torn away in places, revealing a layer of newspaper clippings underneath. Missing persons reports. Dozens of them, all dated within the last few years. Lily's heart raced as she read the names. Her hands trembled when she saw her own name on a clipping dated the day before. She backed away, horrified, and bumped into the nightstand. The lamp fell, shattering on the floor, revealing a hidden trapdoor beneath the bed. She had to leave. Now. She turned to run, but stopped short. The elderly man stood in the doorway, his crooked smile wider than before. "We've been waiting for you," he whispered. Before she could scream, the walls around her seemed to close in, the whispering voices growing louder, overlapping, drowning out her thoughts. The room spun, and darkness swallowed her. Lily's car was found abandoned on the side of the road a week later. There was no sign of her, and the Whispering Pines Motel was never seen again. Locals say that on quiet nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear the whispers of the lost souls trapped within its walls. It was a night I'll never forget. We had just finished our ghost tour of the town's oldest cemetery, a place infamous for its dark history and whispered legends. But the real scare didn't come from the tour guide's stories. No, it came from what happened after. It was just me and my friend Tom. The tour had ended, and everyone else had left, but we lingered. You know how it is. Two guys, a couple of beers in us, feeling brave, invincible. We decided to take one last walk through the graves, alone. The air was colder than it should have been for October. A thick fog rolled in, blanketing the tombstones in a ghostly shroud. We laughed it off, making jokes to mask our growing unease. As we walked deeper into the cemetery, the sound of our footsteps echoed off the stones, creating a disconcerting rhythm. We reached the heart of the cemetery, where the oldest graves were. There, an ancient oak tree stood, gnarled and twisted, its branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Beneath it was the grave of Eliza Blackwell, a woman accused of witchcraft back in the 1700s. They said she cursed the town with her dying breath. Tom dared me to touch the headstone. Feeling a mix of fear and bravado, I stepped forward and placed my hand on the cold, rough surface. The moment my fingers made contact, a sudden chill shot through me, and I swear I heard a whisper, soft, insidious. "Help me!" I jerked my hand back and turned to Tom, ready to accuse him of playing tricks. But his face was as pale as mine, his eyes wide with fear. He'd heard it too. We decided to leave, quickening our pace, our laughter replaced by nervous silence. As we neared the exit, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind us, crunching the gravel. We spun around, but there was no one there, just the fog and the graves. We started running, the footsteps keeping pace, growing louder, closer. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I glanced back one last time and saw her, a shadowy figure, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. We burst through the gates, not stopping until we were back at Tom's car. We jumped in, locking the doors, hearts racing. The cemetery loomed behind us, dark and silent once more. We didn't speak as Tom started the engine and drove away, the horror of what we'd experienced sinking in. To this day, I don't know what we saw, what followed us, but every time I pass that cemetery, I feel a chill, and I hear the faint echo of footsteps behind me. In the small town of Brindlewood, there stood an ancient house on Willow Lane, known as the Thornwood Manor. Abandoned for over 50 years, it had become the stuff of local legend, a place whispered about in hushed tones by townsfolk and children alike. No one dared go near it, for it was said to be cursed, haunted by malevolent spirits that hungered for the living. One foggy autumn evening, a group of friends, Emma, Jake, Lisa, and Ben, decided to explore the Thornwood Manor. They were thrill-seekers, drawn to the unknown, and the rumors only heightened their curiosity. Armed with flashlights and a video camera, they approached the dilapidated house, its windows like empty eye sockets staring into their souls. As they crossed the threshold, a chill enveloped them. The air inside was thick with a palpable sense of dread, and the faint smell of decay hung in the air. The floorboards creaked under their weight, echoing through the silent rooms. Cobwebs draped the corners, and the peeling wallpaper seemed to whisper as it moved slightly in the draft. They started their exploration in the grand foyer, where a massive chandelier hung precariously from the ceiling. The walls were adorned with portraits of the Thornwood family, their eyes seeming to follow the intruders with an unsettling intensity. Emma felt a shiver run down her spine as she glanced at the painted faces, frozen in expressions of eternal sorrow. Moving deeper into the house, they entered the drawing room. An ancient piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed with age. Suddenly, a single note rang out, clear and haunting. They all froze, the sound reverberating through the silence. Jake, the bravest among them, approached the piano, but no one was there. The keys were untouched. "Let's keep moving," Ben suggested, his voice betraying a hint of fear. They made their way to the grand staircase, ascending slowly. Halfway up, the temperature dropped abruptly, and their breath became visible in the cold air. At the top of the stairs, they found a long hallway lined with closed doors. A feeling of oppressive darkness seemed to seep from behind each one. "Which one should we try first?" Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. Jake pointed to the door at the end of the hallway. "That one." They approached cautiously, each step echoing in the silence. Jake turned the handle, and the door creaked open to reveal a bedroom frozen in time. Dust-covered furniture and an old, tattered bedspread gave the room a melancholic air. On the bedside table sat a porcelain doll, its glass eyes staring blankly. Emma stepped forward, reaching for the doll. As her fingers brushed its cold surface, a child's voice echoed through the room, soft and sorrowful. "Why did you leave me?" The friends spun around, but no one was there. The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves. Panic set in, and they backed out of the room, closing the door behind them. "Let's get out of here," Ben urged, but as they turned to leave, the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. The doors on either side began to rattle violently, as if something was trying to break through. The house groaned and creaked, an unearthly sound that filled their ears. They ran, stumbling down the stairs, their flashlights flickering. The front door loomed ahead, but as they reached it, it slammed shut with a deafening bang. They were trapped. A cold, sinister laughter echoed through the house, and the chandelier above began to sway. The portraits on the walls seemed to shift, their sorrowful expressions twisting into malevolent grins. Shadows gathered in the corners, creeping closer, their shapes twisting into ghastly figures. Desperate, they ran towards the back of the house, hoping to find another way out. They burst into the kitchen, where the air was thick with the smell of rot. The old rusted stove flared to life with an eerie green flame, and the cupboards banged open and shut. From the darkness of the pantry, a figure emerged. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered, blood-stained gown. Her eyes were hollow sockets, her mouth stretched into a ghastly, unnatural smile. She reached out with skeletal hands, her nails like claws. "Join us," she hissed, her voice a chorus of agony. In a frenzy of terror, they fought their way past her, stumbling into the basement. The door slammed shut behind them, plunging them into darkness. They fumbled for their flashlights, the beams revealing a room filled with old, dusty furniture and broken toys. The basement walls were covered in writing, scrawled in a dark, sticky substance. It was a diary of madness, detailing the final days of the Thornwood family. Words of despair and anger told of a curse, a ritual gone wrong, and the spirits that now roamed the house, seeking revenge. A cold hand gripped Emma's ankle, pulling her down. She screamed, kicking frantically, but the grip was relentless. The others tried to help, but they too were grabbed by unseen hands, dragged into the shadows. As the darkness closed in, the last thing they heard was the child's voice, whispering through the gloom. "Now you'll never leave." The townsfolk found the house empty the next day, the friends never seen again. Thornwood Manor stood silent, its windows dark, but on quiet nights, the faint sounds of their screams could still be heard, echoing through the haunted halls. The legend of Thornwood Manor lived on, a warning to all who dared to disturb the spirits within.